just a second. So again, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate having you. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Kenny Taylor, and I am joined by the esteemed Dr. Robbie Robichau. And today
Hi.
we're going to be talking to you about partnership principles for university and nonprofit collaborations. So let me stop there and go through our agenda for the day. So we'll just give you a little bit of background about us, us being the Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy. Dr. Robichau and myself will introduce ourselves just a little longer, but we won't spend a lot of time there. What we're all here for today to talk about cross-sector collaboration. Then we'll get into the importance of university and nonprofit partnerships, talk about successful components related to those partnerships. And because this is a professional development webinar, talk about some of the individual leadership skills that it takes to thrive in that space. And then some recent takeaways and learnings from a conference that we just hosted with the same topic in mind. And we'll add a bit of context there when we get there. And of course, we always try to leave time in the end for open discussion. But if you have questions along the way, just in the name of trying to make this as interactive as possible, feel free to raise your hand and we'll acknowledge your question. And we're certainly open to stopping in the middle of any of our presentation time. So know that as well, too. Just real quick about our center. The Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy was founded and launched in 2017, and our mission is to support the vibrancy of the nonprofit and philanthropic sector here in Texas and beyond. We focus on three areas, that being research, professional outreach, and engaged learning. I imagine that many of you all are familiar with some of our educational offerings, but we certainly have an in-residence and in-person Master of Public Service and Administration graduate degree. We also offer our online Executive Master of Public Service and Administration. Dr. Robichau will talk a little bit more about the Certificate in Nonprofit Management, which she leads, and then also our variety of continuing education or continuing and professional education certificates. Let me hand it over to Dr. Robichau.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I don't often get to do these, so I appreciate you all jumping on and thinking about what we're going to talk about today. Is this where you want me to do my introduction, Kenny, or you want me to talk a little bit about the certificate program? Which one?
Oh, yeah. Why don't you do a brief introduction? I think we've got a slide
Okay,
for that.
cool. Yeah. So my name is Robbie Robichau, as Dr. Taylor said, and this is my 6th year at the Bush School. And I really focus on kind of general nonprofit accountability and management challenges that organizations face. I have done a lot of research recently on meaningfulness in work and how that gets complicated when people are burned out and emotionally exhausted, but at the same time find their work really important and they want to stick around in their organization. So I really have maybe become a little bit more of an HR specialist and thinking about how do you run organizations to help people feel included? How do you run organizations to help people also find meaning in their work? And at the same time, you've got to achieve a mission. So how are you measuring these metrics that your funders or our grantees want to know more about? So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this with our students and in the workplace. I tend to work with a lot of smaller nonprofits, which I guess is pretty relevant here in Texas, since we do have a lot of smaller organizations and thinking through administrative challenges around capacity issues. So that does include a lot of funding challenges organizations currently face. So in my role as my new role as a certificate director, really just trying to help people understand what it means at a bare minimum to be a nonprofit professional. How do you manage your organization? What are you thinking about the financial aspects of it? Did I just get kicked out of Zoom?
No, you're there.
Okay, sorry. My screen just went black, so I'm still here. All right. And yeah, so I'm here at the Bush School, and I would love to chat with any of you if you want to know more about our certificate program and what we do.
And like I mentioned, Kenny Taylor, I've been here at the Bush School. This is my 7th year. Primarily, I work on the nonprofit management side as well, primarily focusing on our nonprofit management courses, a high focus in our grants and project management course, sometimes on the foundations of the nonprofit sector class, and also our social justice courses as well too. I get to oversee our continuing and professional education courses and certificates that we have. Those are our non-credit offerings. The ones that Dr. Robichau just mentioned are for-credit graduate course offerings that we have with our certificate in nonprofit management there. But proud faculty member here at the Bush School, and it's always a pleasure to do things like this, which fall in our area of engaged learning. So the opportunity to participate with folks out in the field is highly important to us here at the school, which is the reason why we, I guess, think about things like this. My background, of course, is as a nonprofit professional, having served the mission of Big Brothers Big Sisters for more than 12 years. And so bringing that into the school has been, I think, a good mix of perspective for our students, and why the opportunity to work with Dr. Robichau and thinking about how does this stuff work on the ground and working with so many nonprofit organizations is highly important to us, and certainly a foundation of the school in terms of how we train our students.
Mm-hmm. And I should add too, something that we're going to talk a little bit about today is our conference we had recently, our Bridge conference. And Kenny and I have spent a lot of time talking about what our own partnership looks like. Me as an academic researcher and professor, but not with decades of experience in the nonprofit sector, but researching these things, and him with all this experience. And how do we really bridge the gap between what I need for my own job performance and what he needs for his job performance. And so we've actually been talking about this challenge for a few years. And so this is sort of the manifestation of several years of conversation about how can we collaborate better? How can we find ways to really speak to the needs of each of our professions and outcome metrics for our own jobs, but at the same time, having very much a community sense orientation of why are we doing this work if we're not helping our communities? And helping our nonprofit sector is an important part of the social infrastructure of the state of Texas as well.
Yeah, so something I used to certainly think about as a nonprofit professional, you know, we work in our silos, we work for our respective missions at the organizations that we're employed by. And I certainly remember a day when I thought that I could solve everything I needed to in the youth development space for the number of years that I was engaged and worked for Big Brothers Big Sisters. But certainly on the back end of my career, started to think about, hey, I need to partner with other like-minded organizations. I need to have relationships with other like-minded people to really solve some of the problems that we're running into at the time in the Austin community, which is my last role with Big Brothers Big Sisters as the executive director over there. But never really thought about what that meant from a research standpoint. What I would say, or what I think I should at least queue up, is when I was sitting in that seat of executive director at my organization, really the limits of the relationships that I had with that other university down the street, is I think the way that we put it, is when we would work together in terms of they needed students from UT needed internships. And so at the time, I would certainly take in interns, but it really didn't go much further than that in terms of thinking about what my relationship as a nonprofit executive in the Austin community would be like working with a big institution like the University of Texas. But now on this side, in terms of thinking about what those relationships look like, what I have in front of you is a definition from the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And if you look through the academic literature, I mean, they're kind of defined in the same ways, but just to start off in terms of giving a general definition of what is a cross-sector collaboration, alliances of individuals and organizations, whether it be from the nonprofit, university, government, philanthropic, and business sector, that use their diverse perspectives and resources to jointly solve problems. And I think there's some agreement out there that the only way really to kind of dig into some of these issues is working together. I think we have a really good recent example with COVID where we were forced into partnering with one another, maybe like never before, even though it's a routine topic of conversations at our organizations. Any thoughts there, Dr. Robichau?
I mean, I think that, of course, COVID sort of exacerbated the need to collaborate and do that across different sectors, but it's always been around. It's always been a challenge, especially for government, to find people to implement the work of government and serving people, especially in social service. So a lot of my research has really been in social service nonprofits, which some of you identified already on the chat. That's what you do, but it's also pretty relevant to all organizational structures. Sometimes that's because there's expertise outside of our organization we don't have, so it's very instrumental, or we need extra funding. And other times we're just trying to really meet the need of our clients. And that means we need more integrated care models, and that can't be done by one organization alone. You know, a lot of my time has really spent with students trying to understand systematically what is happening, that you have organizations trying to solve these really complex problems that they didn't create. So an individual organization really can't accomplish some of these big missional goals without working with other people. It takes kind of big picture thinking. And so as we think about some of the challenges today, I think definitely innovation is one of the ones that we need to consider for the nonprofit sector. We're sort of behind in this space. I think in a lot of ways, we started out quite innovative. We had ideas about how to solve problems. We had our theories of change. We went into different areas and different communities with very much solution focused. Over time, you know, especially as organizations started taking more government funding, there became more constraints on how they could implement their services. And so we've been faced with, well, how do I take that money from potentially a big funder who has specific performance metric systems in place they want to see us do, but also us knowing that's not the best way to serve my clients. That outcome is not my ideal outcome for them. And so this is definitely something that has been a challenge for us as the nonprofit sector globally is growing, right? We know that we've had growth in Texas, but we also know globally, right, the role of NGOs has become quite important. So how are we thinking systematically about the problems we're addressing, recognizing we need big picture solutions? And at the same time, are we engaging in innovative mindsets about, is there a better way we can fix the process of our services or what we do, how we meet our clients' needs?
Yeah, so if those of you all that are joining us today, if you really think about just to the bullet point or first bullet point, just beyond the definition of the complexity of today's challenges, you know, really what some of the scholarly literature is pointing towards is at our respective organizations, we are making decisions around working in our own space and lowering the complexity of how we view problems to stay kind of in that bucket of how we go about our work, or either deciding, realizing, and accepting how challenging some of our issues are today and bringing in others to kind of solve some of these problems. So when we bring in others to find these solutions, again, the academic literature is going to speak to that being good, or we're making a decision not to go further in terms of advancing our own mission. So again, I mean, I can openly say, like I started off with, you know, it's very easy to get kind of caught up in the missions that we work for, do our work, perform, advance in our fields, things like that, without working with others. Again, the literature will say that that's an intentional decision, that it may be personal, whatever it might be. But we really need to consider how we go about engaging others in processes like this so that we can get to the scaling and sustaining these relationships. And so again, the way that I was trained when I was thinking on the ground at Big Brothers Big Sisters is, you know, we have a plan, we have money, we know what we do is good, let's go do as much of that as possible. But we really kind of thought about that internally and what that meant for us. and not so much bringing in others to help us with that process, which of course is easy to see now on the other side what type of issue that was, even though we were doing good work.
It's with thinking about, I just want to add something when
Mhm.
thinking about this challenge organizations are facing with sustainability. I've been dabbling in the world of environmental social governance, which a lot of big corporations have really been trying to measure their performance and environment and the social aspects and the governance perspectives. And I met with a professional in that space at KPMG yesterday, and the conversation was really about framing everything as sustainability. And so sustainability and reducing risk is kind of how people are now talking about this. And so when we think about the work of the nonprofits, we can think about sustainability and maybe even an environmental type way. Maybe you're not focused on the environment, but what you do has implications for the environment, as well as, the social infrastructure. I think this is what I've been spending some time talking with others in the field about. How do we think about the social sector infrastructure across the state of Texas? How do we get people networking with one another in a way that can help them achieve their mission, but also think more broadly about how do we best serve the needs of our state? And, a lot of our nonprofit folks are leading the way in this space. I saw several people from hospital systems and in healthcare. We can't do the work and meet people's needs if we don't have some model of sustainability. And that, of course, is wrapped up in funding, but it's also wrapped up in how we're thinking about our challenges and how we're approaching these challenges. Are we borrowing concepts from government or business that we can implement in our nonprofits in a successful way? And obviously, cross-sector partnerships is one of the most common ways we've seen really big systematic change happen across the U.S.
Yeah, so if we shift over to our next slide in terms of thinking about, you know, why university and nonprofit collaboration, and I guess does it make sense? But certainly, as I alluded to a little earlier, my experience on the nonprofit side was really kind of limited to students, interactions with that other university to place students as interns. And we certainly have that priority and focus here as well too. We always think about how can we enrich our students' educational background with field experience. And so we're, lucky to be in an environment like College Station in Bryan, where we work so closely with many of our local nonprofit organizations, and they support our students just as much as we do. So this is good for us. But with that said, it's only one component of how we think about what these collaborations look like. So my guess is the start of some of this is really literally just focused on students. But to Dr. Robichau's background, when we think about how do we deepen and enhance the impact of research, maybe you could reflect on or comment on some of your research and working with organization and what that's meant to you.
Yeah. So at the Bush School, one of the things we do with our students is a capstone model, which is a year-long client-based course where we spend the fall learning about a topic. So I'm going to use the most recent example, which is working with Allies Against Slavery in Austin, which is a anti-human trafficking data platform. So they're collecting metrics across the state. They're being funded by the state of Texas originally to develop this model where we can see where youth are most at risk across Texas. It's not always in the most obvious places as well. So what can we dig a little bit deeper? So my students last year were tasked with understanding what the organization needs to do to scale, right? And so they want to have a national model. They've been successful. They have multiple states coming to them and saying, hey, can you move to our state? Can you implement this data platform? Because we don't have data. We can't prove we have a problem if we don't have different metrics to show that we have a problem. And so for us, my students and I spent some time looking at what are other kind of data platforms that are a nonprofit model. So we can take the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, right? It's at the federal level now, but it didn't start that way. It took time to build up to scale their organization. But at the same time, right, it's a really small organization. At the time when we started our capstone, they had 7 people working there. So how realistic was it they could expand to 4 or 5 states? immediately that was just not doable. So we spent a year kind of designing a question saying, what does it take to scale and be sustainable over time? We know that you could scale because other states have interest and you have a model that works, but how are you going to do that sustainability kind of question? How are you going to keep your people? How are you going to hire the right people? So my students, one of the things we did was we tracked how many hours the students work for this organization over the year. So we had technically 3,200 billable hours. And so this is, like I said, is a pretty unique model in that we work directly with clients to design a research and question, address a research question, design it, and implement the research. And so, you know, if we kind of use the standard consulting rate of $125 an hour, that project, my students' time over the year was about a $400,000 project. And so it was very intense. And so, you know, one of the things we do is, which is great, is we deliver this project and this product and a report. But then, you know, I started really trying to focus on closing that loop. So what happened because of your work with us for a year, right? Was there any outcome for the organization? So some of the things the organization did after our report, right? They hired a development person because they realized they could not scale without someone doing specific fundraising work and thinking about how do we have enough money to hire the people it takes to implement a model. They started increasing the number of interns they had, undergraduate level as well as the graduate level. And then programmatically, they decided they did need to slow down and scale state by state, right? To make sure they have enough money to really understand the cost of implementing their data platform in a new state. And then this year, we're doing a second part of that project and working with them. And so I say all that to say is that I've worked with different nonprofits and local governments, think about 40 different ones. And the real challenge, right, is for organizations or for nonprofits to get a win-win. And that is they need a deliverable that is helpful for their decision making. And our students, right, also need that experience and understanding that in the real world, there isn't always data to help you tell your story. You have to create your own data. It takes time and sophistication to know what you're tracking, what you're measuring, and how you're going to connect that to impact. So in a project-based course with a professor, right, with the university nonprofit collaboration, sometimes the projects are really big. And sometimes they're a little bit small. So I've even worked with organizations to develop like planning for a strategic plan, not actually implementing that strategic plan, but what are the questions? Who are your stakeholders? What power and interest do they have? And I've done things as simple as having a succession leadership manual. What are you going to do if your CEO leaves tomorrow? How would you run your organization? Do you have access to all the files? So just thinking through the practical day-to-day issues organizations face, and sometimes they have limited capacity, so they don't, you know, sometimes people have multiple roles beyond their job description. So are your job descriptions even clear? And so these are things that, right, universities can work with nonprofits to do, and it can create a win-win for students learning as well as deliverables for the organization. I also know Dr. Taylor has also done several capstone projects, but for me as an academic, right, I love to think about how I can use this in a research type way. And that's always really challenging because the timelines are different between me as an academic, the semester that our students operate in organizations who wanted results yesterday, right? You need that for some reason. So that there are definitely challenges wrapped up in these university nonprofit collaborations, but there are definitely models of success where you can have more of a win-win.
Yeah, and I think I would just just to bounce around a little bit based on the comment that you just made and what I've certainly said a few times at this point, thinking about my relationship and my former role with universities, mostly centering on students. It was hard to envision that someone at the time, that someone from a university would be able to help me in delivering my mission if they are or have been a scholar their entire career, having or not having the on the ground experience. But what I would say is that we live in a different world today. There's scholars like Dr. Robichau and others, of course, around here at the school that are interested in how this actually applies on the ground. So for any of you all joining us thinking that there may not be interest, I think I would say the opposite is true. But you do have to go find who those folks are. and it can certainly be tricky. Again, here at the Bush School, again, we're a little spoiled and just so happen to be in the right community as a land grant institution, and how we think about here in Aggie land and what our obligation is to the community here, where it's promoted that we work with one another. It's part of the culture here that we think about our organizations thriving here, our nonprofit and non-governmental organizations, that they thrive and prosper based on making the area here a better place for those who live here and for all the students that come here to get trained to go into a career of service.
I want to add, someone in the chat, Nomi, hope I said that right, kind of noted that sometimes when you do get interns, they're assigned or they're given very specific roles. And so how do you kind of tailor what your organization needs, or how that needs may change over the time you have an intern? So I often kind of tell my students, I was like, it's okay I encourage them to have a conversation with the person who's overseeing their internship about job description. And if a job description you feel like is not actually accurate for what that student is doing or what that student thought they signed up for, it's okay to have a conversation around, hey, I know you need me to, do some administrative paperwork for you. However, I would love to also go with you when you go to fundraising events and learn how to network and learn how to talk to people or sit in a board meeting, right? Well, we do that. It's one thing we do here is we offer the opportunity for our students to just sit in a board meeting, see what it's like. Because a lot of times, right, these things in students' minds are really big and they feel like they don't have anything to contribute. But I'm on a local nonprofit board as well. And we do have Bush School student interns, and they are graduate students. But one of the things we've found is they've been great for us thinking about some of our fundraising activities that we're engaging in, because they're thinking about what people their age want to do. And most of us are a little bit older on the board. And so we're not as creative in thinking about ways to attract other donors, even if it's smaller donors. How do we engage students? So I've found they help me be more innovative as well in my own thinking, in the classroom as well. It applies across multiple settings, but there are different ways you can use interns, is my point. And some of them, right, are going to be great. And you can give them really challenging tasks. And even if they fail, I always frame failure as a way to learn. You learn more when we're failing. It's hard for organizations to kind of think from an entrepreneurial mindset and be okay with failure. But certainly, if you have students, you can always challenge them. I encourage you to challenge them and have higher expectations. And at the same time, that goes back down to like having a real honest conversation of a job description and the different tasks you need them to do. And sometimes you have to connect it to the outcome and measures of impact for them. They won't always see that connection. But I have generally found from the student's perspective, they enjoy working with nonprofits, whether it's in a service learning type classroom space where it's just a semester, or even in the capstone. For them, this is the applied work they really are looking forward to. And when they go do interviews, this is what they talk about, because I have to write letters of recommendation for them or field phone calls from people. And they want to say, tell me about how this student performed in that group setting. And so I can do that especially when they've worked with clients.
Yeah, totally agree to that point. On the front end, as much as you can, negotiate, put it in writing or get it in writing, that your experience as interns, for any of you all with that concern, the more that you can get that in writing and understood on the front end, usually the better those go, or it can certainly serve as a reminder that this is what you're supposed to be doing if the tasks kind of get off a bit. So we've certainly seen that happen as well too. Okay, maybe let's talk a little bit about some of the recommendations, and all of those that you see here again, in my estimation anyway, in our estimation anyway, really kind of cut across things that come up time and time again of how do you go about developing some of these partnerships, thinking about these cross-sector collaborations. I mean, I know we certainly want to get to the point where we're, a little open discussion and some of your input as well too, of what's happening on the ground for you. But if we think about any of these, Dr. Robichau, I'll just go through some of them, but just, making sure that there's a foundation to start with and that it's authentic. So when you're thinking about the relationships even that you attempt to go into in terms of having some of these partnerships, are they people that you already know? Do you have a relationship there? Independently, are you committed to building that relationship? And you definitely want it to be authentic and you're willing to go about it in that process. I think some of Dr. Robichau's stuff comes up on trust. So building trust over time in these relationships is certainly important. Again, just with this being a professional development opportunity, we will certainly talk a little bit more about the individual leadership responsibility associated, whether it be on the academic side with universities or on the nonprofit side. How do we need to think about this stuff individually? Because it always breaks down to individual leadership. If both sides aren't benefiting, then something certainly is off. And I think that's why we've certainly had some organizations not willing to go into partnerships because, we're not seeing what was supposed to happen on our side and the other side is benefiting. Transparency, this was something, again, we'll talk about it a little bit more in relation to our conference, but transparency regarding financial resources. And I can think of many occasions where we talked about partnering or doing something together, but money didn't come up. And if money doesn't come up, then usually there's going to be some separation there. And then measuring for success, of course, something else that's really important to us here at the school. How do we measure what we're doing? And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But Dr. Robichau, any of those kind of stick out to you?
A couple of things, and I think it came up at the conference that a lot of our participants and our nonprofit professionals really had not thought about working with a university partner, and they didn't know how to start. Right? What does that start look like for all of us? And sometimes it is a really great intern. You're like, where are you? Who's your professor? Or where are you learning all this material? And you ask them. But sometimes it's also just, I've had times where people have sent me an email and said, hey, I see you do a lot of work in child welfare. Would you be willing to sit on a call with me and help me think about a challenge I'm having? And honestly, a lot of us in the academic space, we actually want to have impact beyond the students that we serve. We want to have community impact, especially those in the nonprofit sector. And so I love sitting on calls with people and being like, let's work through a challenge. I don't have to implement it, but I can think about what the research is telling me about a topic. And so that idea of building trust means that each partner has to sometimes be vulnerable about what their skill sets are, what they know, what they need help on, and what they don't know, right? And I think that has particularly been a challenge for a lot of academics, just to say, hey, I'm going to learn with you. Let's make this a community. Let's have an authentic foundation, which maybe goes to Dr. Taylor's point about, yeah, leadership is important. If you like Brene Brown's work on being vulnerable and authentic at the same time, you may get more out of it by telling people what you really need and what you don't know, as opposed to, I know all these things and let me just tell you what I know, right? So Kenny, I know you have another slide you wanted to share, but I definitely wanted to say that about what does building trust look like and how do you do that in the nonprofit academic type space?
Yes, it's tough because it takes time, and usually our calendars really aren't lining up so much between organizations and university faculty members or professors that you might be working with. So trust can be a little weird just based on timing alone, but it's so key to everything we do. And I think confidently we can say trust comes up in most all of the work that we do, especially in mission-based settings, that's for sure. So I don't think we can help ourselves, but over on the next slide, kind of have just a quick model to, how to think about some of this, getting back to thinking about some of the individual leadership stuff. And again, I mean, even though this is from the Stanford Social Innovation Review from a few years back, literature beyond that, earlier than that, and more recent literature kind of says the same thing. So what do we need when we go into kind of thinking about these cross-sector collaborations and working with those outside of our space? Again, we just talked about trust. Power comes up. And I mean, again, I think transparently, we can kind of talk about, there's usually some separation with Dr. Robichau and I have talked about this. universities think they're up here and nonprofit organizations are here. Maybe there's some sense of that. So how can we truly work together if we can't develop trust? And they're asking me, or universities are asking me at my nonprofit organization what they need, but they're not really concerned about how I need to go about advancing my particular mission that I've dedicated my life to. So sometimes it gets a little weird, but again, you have to find the right institution. You have to find the right faculty members that are doing similar work. Surely you're going to bump into in that process some that just simply aren't interested. And I think that that's okay. But also I would say that I think we live in a time where there's folks that are highly interested in this, just like Dr. Robichau mentioned, that it's vital for her and others' career for being researchers. When we think about the solving problems piece, I know, Robbie, you think about, systems approach all the time, but that collective agreement on how outcomes are produced, and that looks so different on both sides. So again, I'll just go to the model that I was familiar with at Big Brothers Big Sisters. We had a service delivery system that we had to follow that we know led to these outcomes of higher developmental assets in children that I was familiar with. Then when you start incorporating these partnerships, the sense was anyone that I'm partnering with, can they get on board with how I have to deliver my services? It's can be very selfish, that's for sure. But so in doing so and promoting, knowing that we can't do it alone, how do we understand and have collective agreement about the outcomes that we both need? Highly important in the process. Then over to the impact, how do we ensure that what we're doing, that what is learned, what comes out of the process is accessible to all? And what we've seen is that usually there aren't strategies for, even once we come together in partnership, even when we understand what we've learned, then how do we bring others into that process by sharing all that we learned so that we can then go broader in terms of advancing, our respective missions, whether it be on the university side, on the nonprofit side, and even broader out, broadcasting out into the communities that we operate in. Any thoughts there, Dr. Robichau?
I don't know. I was thinking about this idea by Mary Parker Fowler, that for us to really live in a successful democracy, people have to be engaged in citizenship. And that often means, instead of having a power over approach, we have a power with approach. And after we've spent a lot of the last few years really focused on a lot of the DEI and JEDI work, like that's what it means. Like we're power with. It's not like someone's trying to hold power over others, but like empowering one another to move forward towards an end goal. And so a lot of that is wrapped up in developing trust authentically. And the counter of developing trust, right, is to be vulnerable about what are the things I need to do my work better. Right. And so trying to find that win-win that we're supposed to look for in negotiation, but it's true in any kind of partnership. What are your actual needs? What do you have to deliver? What do I have to deliver? What do you have to deliver? And what's a reasonable expectation for our community that we can work through to get a result that both parties can be happy with? And so I do think that is challenge. And the challenge is that it takes time, and recognizing that there are barriers. Certainly universities are not agile. That's not what we're supposed to. Like, science is often very slow. So if you're in a space and you need a big project, right, that's going to take a semester or two. You start those conversations earlier, but there are sometimes just one-off challenges you're having, and you just need to bounce an idea off someone. I think, I have guest speakers in my class. I know Kenny's had guest speakers in her class. Sometimes I love to have a guest speaker, even if it's virtually, come in and say, this is a challenge I'm facing. And while they're asking students, right, we're just going to talk about it, get impact, get some ideas flowing about what we think solutions are going to be. So that's valuable for my students to see that they have learned things in the program program that are applicable, but it's also valuable for the organization to say, oh, I never thought about those things. I'm going to go back and do my research and see if that makes sense for us. And so, sharing knowledge is obviously what we do at universities, but I think that knowledge is a two-way street. And so there are feedback mechanisms certainly built in our capstone model and certain project service learning aspects where we're learning from each other. And that's how you really get power with your community and not over them.
So we talked a little earlier, this is work that we're committed to. So much so that the conference that Dr. Robichau and I referenced a little earlier when we got started, is what evolved out of some very basic conversations that we've had here around the school, considering that we're in business to produce future leaders in the public service space. I mean, that's what we basically do here at the school. As a land-grant university, our commitment to the local community here and how we work with local organizations. And so of some of those talks, with the consideration of Texas A&M University being a land-grant institution committed to our local community, turned into a recent conference. Having looked at some of you all who registered, I know that there's not everyone here who registered, and we had the opportunity to take a look at. Some of you all, I think, hopefully joined us for our Bridge Conference. Maybe if you did, if you would throw that in the chat, that would be good. But with our Bridge Conference, we've been thinking about this so much that it turned into trying to convene folks from across the state of Texas to talk about what these university nonprofit cross-sector partnerships might look like. Not only what they might look like, but also to showcase examples of what's going on across our state in the name of mission-based work. And the Bridge Conference, our first time, accomplished that approximately 1 month ago. And so what we, I think, have presented so far is just kind of straight from the academic literature. But if we go over to the next slide, we can talk just a little bit about some of the things that came out of the conference. Now, of course, I'm not capturing it all here, but to one of the last points that Dr. Robichau made, just real quick, so we can get to kind of opening up a little bit, is timing is weird. There's a wide variety when partnerships or potential partners are available to one another. Now, even though we showcase a variety of cross-sector partnerships across the state of Texas, from the Houston area, from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a couple of different examples up there. Some folks thought it was better to start over the summer. Some wanted to stay away from the fall. The spring was better just based on teaching loads. As a former nonprofit professional, the only time that I ever remember having a bit of downtime was toward the Christmas holiday, toward the end of the year when we're closing things out. So one thing that was really weird is how do you come together time-wise? We talked a little bit earlier about transparency and funding. So how we understand what the costs are of going into these partnerships was something that was highlighted at the conference, as well as, again, just that ability. We've used the word transparency a few times, but also be willing to talk about money as well, too. And that applies on both sides. And then one thing that I thought was really cool that came from the conference is how do we, let's just say a university partner and a nonprofit partner, hand in hand, walk into someone's office, a foundation, let's say, or donors, and try to leverage financial resources together. I think in many cases, we can make a better case to support us in partnership than we can away from one another. And then the other thing that was really exciting to talk about a bit at the conference was the use of technology. So how we embrace the use of aligning the technology differences that we have. What are you using at your nonprofit organization? What's being used at or in university environments? Making sure that we have skills on both sides to understand the use of technology and how fast we embrace the use of technology for these types of projects. Dr. Robichau, I don't know if any of that or stuff that stuck out to you from the conference in the name of bettering some of these partnerships?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it was just in the context of partnership, but what I found really, I guess, surprising for me was how happy people were to be able to network with nonprofit professionals who is totally out of their purview, they would have never thought existed, would have not had that opportunity in any other space. And the fact that there are so many people really thinking about the big challenges facing our state, especially our rural folks who are often kind of left out of these conversations, and for them to have an opportunity to meet people from Houston or Dallas or foundations that have resources, but also just like peers, people I can talk about challenges are that I have in my organization. We did some roundtable discussions, and it was just, here's a couple questions. Let's talk about what's happening in your organization and think through these problems together. So I think there is a need for us to think not just about our organization, but the nonprofit sector in Texas as well, because it does affect our communities. It will eventually impact our clients in some way, right? And so are we working together to build up the state? And so I think we talked about at the conference, the Building Built for Texas report, and why it's important that we're collecting big data so we can show the legislature, hey, this is what's happening. These are the trends. These are the needs. These are the growth areas across the state. And there needs to be more resources. And so, a lot of times you can get more collectively than you can individually. So how do we do that better? I think was one of the takeaways for me, especially the networking aspects of people, they just want to know other people in this space
Mhm.
to ask questions of.
That's great. I think that's about all that we have to present. Let's open it up for any questions that folks may have. We always try to leave a bit of time on the back end to where if there's a burning question or any thoughts, or if anyone wants to share examples of what you might be going through, feel free. Now would certainly be the time to do so. So with that said, any questions that folks have, or somebody want to chime in and comment on something that we discussed?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I just wanted to first off say thank you guys for hosting this. This is truly it has opened my eyes. My name is Erkin. I own a Midporium. We're fairly a small nonprofit. We just got established with the Secretary of State, and we just filed for all our tax numbers and stuff. And I wanted to, I'll make this pretty short. But during in the middle of COVID, my father, he suffered a medical emergency. Now, I was born and raised in Aggieland, and so I was always surrounded by, and it was built into me, instilled to me at a young age of community support, and like how you guys mentioned, the obligation to communities. So when we went to the hospital, we ended up looking at all the medical costs and bills, and who helped us was the Aggieland community, and they helped us with our costs and stuff. But also then at the time, whenever I was in high school, I never wanted to become a doctor. I was just wanted to play basketball professionally or whatever. And so at the time, the surgeon, after he came and said everything was going to be all right, he gifted me his stethoscope. And from then on, I've always been passionate about medicine. And so I geared my interest to medicine, and I ended up doing shadowing at Texas Medical Center and Houston Methodist and whatnot. And one thing I noticed was first, like the cost of attendance to medical schools, and second was the burnout rate. A lot of, even in such a large hospital such as Texas Medical Center, I could maybe count on my hands 5 or 6 doctors who were truly really passionate and who were not really burnt out. But I saw a lot of residents, medical students, they were very burnt out. And even me and my board members and my team, even in our first semester of pre-med college years, we're just like, wow, this is really hard and we need help. So we ended up looking at this, we did research ourselves, like how you guys mentioned, and we found out from the AMA, American Medical Association, that in 2022, there was a 67% burnout rate of physicians. And also medical students and pre-med students had the highest burnout rate through their pre-medical years. And so we established this problem, and we found that there's this problem and that there needs to be something done to help. And so me and my board members founded Medporium, which is focused on like free medical education and as well as preventing burnout. And we ended up also doing more research to rural and low income people here in Aggieland. And we also found that some people don't even know what doctors are at a young age because their parents, from where they came from, they never really went to the doctors. And it just kind of, over the course of the years, in the past, a doctor was someone who you looked to, and it was a noble profession, and it is someone who provides you care. And nowadays, not a lot of people are, they're veering away and they're shying away from medical school and becoming a physician in general, just because of the costs and the burnout rate.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. We were just talking about burnout and exhaustion right before.
Did you hear our call before we got
I was
started?
gonna say.
I just got off. I have a doctoral student. I'm on their committee, and we're studying the medical burnout and the fact that so many people are using the word burnout, but there is a clinical definition of the word. And so one of the things that he's trying to do in his research is kind of not only look at individual burnout, what are the factors, but thinking about it at the societal level. What is happening? What is the pressure for performance? What is the marketization pressures to see more in the medical sense, like see more patients? So the part that a lot of, and I've talked to my kid's doctor, so this is pretty anecdotal. What she really enjoys is her time with the kids, right? And she gets to ask them how they're doing. But the organization, even though it's a nonprofit hospital, was like, no, you need to see 30 or 40 patients a day. And if you're underperforming, then that becomes a problem. And so I think there are systematic problems going on in society where the performance on the individual is so high, and it takes away from the parts of their work that they find most meaningful. And so there is a need for balance, right? And burnout is real, well care plans, but as a manager, right, helping employees figure out what's the most meaningful part of their job and trying to get them more time to do that. And sometimes it is outsourcing. So we've seen in the field of medicine transcription services where, there's someone on a live kind of call when a doctor meets with a patient. My doctor uses this, someone's transcribing the notes for them. And she's like, that saves me 10 or 20 hours a week. Not having to, I can go in and edit notes much faster than transcribe them myself. So there are innovations out there that are happening, but no doubt it's a challenge.
Yeah, feel free to connect with us outside of this to have, to talk about that a little bit more. So we appreciate you joining us. I see Brian has his hand raised. Good to see you again. I know you were at Bridge, and what you got for us?
Absolutely. I love the Bridge Conference, guys. I've actually been in contact with several people that I met there, and we're actually collaborating about some of the goals that I have and they have, and working together to make that happen. So that was fantastic for me. But my question really is more about structuring. Like, I'm pretty much like EJ. Our foundation is pretty new. We're in our first year, and I think we lack a strategic plan. We've done the documents and the charter and the Secretary of State and all that thing, but that's just kind of, it feels like it's stuff everywhere now. And so now, how do we get everything lined up and moving in one direction so that we're organized and moving in one direction? Because I feel like we're putting out fires, we're trying to execute our program. And just to give you an idea, my nonprofit centers around Black men at Texas A&M University. I'm an alumni class of 1995. And I've noticed, one thing that we've noticed is the number of Black men at the university has dropped significantly since the 90s. And believe it or not, even though the university has doubled in size. And so we're trying to reverse that trend. And we've come up with this idea of the Kevin Carruthers Leadership Institute. Kevin Carruthers was the first first director of the Multicultural Services Department at A&M over in the MSC. And he created an environment where we really were thriving in the 90s, but we've kind of gone backwards in the last 20 years, it seems like. And so our organization is trying to reinsert what some of the teachings and things that he brought to the university. That being said, we're in our first year. We've got 12 scholars, and it's a mentoring program, scholarship, summer internships, and monthly leadership workshops for Black male students, because we want to make sure that if we get them there at the campus, then they're going to graduate. Because right now we're finding less than 50% are graduating on time and less than 70% are ever graduating. So those are problems we're trying to solve. But we need help. I mean, it's like I'm the executive director. We have like 3 or 4 other guys that are working on it and a lot of volunteers, but it's hard organizing everyone and getting some of the things that we want done accomplished. So I'm thinking a strategic plan would be great. I heard you guys talking about it, but where do you get started on that? Who can I talk to? Is there a student or something that we work with, or do we talk to one of you guys? What's next?
Yeah, we talked about, I know you said you connected with some or others from Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Come see me and we'll talk a little bit more about your next steps with some of that. We certainly don't or won't have all the answers, but that's certainly some guidance that we could give you. And I know we talked about some of that. So the same offer is stands. I'd be happy to help in any ways that I can, for sure.
Okay,
And
I'll reach out to you directly.
I
Yep.
would just note too, thinking about, strategic planning, there's the how do you design a strategic plan, and then there's how do you implement it. So getting a student involved, particularly one of our students, in designing it, that
Yes.
includes what you're going to measure, who are your direct stakeholders, who are your indirect stakeholders. Those people often get left out, but they're really critical in your organization's success. And so, that could be an intern that's specifically focused on a summer job of like designing a strategic plan, and 1 year, 3 year, right? A lot of times these reports, when you hire a company or consultant, they'll come in and give you a 30 or 40-page report and you never open it again. So it's just not useful. So really focusing on how do I integrate planning into my quarterly meetings in some way. So we're reviewing the strategic plan and being, oh, we said we were going to achieve that goal by this date. We're falling behind. So anyway,
That's
there's
where I am.
a lot of ways you could use students in these things, and they have the time to design it really well. They may not have the skills to implement it just yet. It really depends on where your organization's at. But as a new organization, right, you've got to be thinking for the next year, the third year, and what you do that first year and what you're tracking can help you get the money you need later to support you. So you really need to spend time like thinking about all these metrics and performance systems so that you can get the results, and a way to have your students really involved in that process. That's also something people often forget when they're doing a strategic plan, is like the people that are actually receiving your services actually have the best ways you can improve your organization. They've got ideas. You just have to ask them. They may be afraid to tell you, but if you have a third party kind of say, what worked, what didn't work, how can we improve, right? They're much more likely to tell them.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I
I'll be
look
in
forward
touch,
to
guys.
hearing from you. Yeah. Let's see. I know we're at time, but I know I can certainly hang for a few. We want to make sure that we thank those of you all who joined us today. We greatly appreciate your support, but I'd certainly be open for one more question. If not, next month, another webinar that will focus on engaging the next generation of volunteers and donors. And I think Dr. Angela Seaworth will facilitate that conversation. And in terms of our, other things that are on the horizon, this coming fall, our continuing and professional education certificates restart on September the 18th, including our certificate in nonprofit leadership and social justice leadership, and also in fundraising leadership. So be on the lookout for those. But with that said, again, I know we're at time, so anyone that needs to drop off, great to see you as always. Make sure to connect with us and follow us. But again, I'll hang for a few if there's any other questions. And if not, I see a lot of familiar faces. Naomi, good to see you. Deborah, good to see you. So Dr. Nakamura. We had some former students who left a little earlier. We'll give you your time back. I see there's Dr. Deborah Kerr. Thanks for joining us. Good to see everyone. And again, look for us next time.